Hey guys, this is Chad Jadiste, and you're listening to The Art of Suffering. Our mess becomes God's message. In ancient Israel, following the Exodus out of Egypt, in several subsequent years of God's reign, through righteous judges, the people began to plead with the prophet Samuel for an earthly king, like many of their neighboring nations. God instructed Samuel to anoint a man named Saul, who became the first king of Israel. Saul's disobedience quickly lost favor with God, and the prophet Samuel was sent to the town of Bethlehem to anoint one of Jesse's 8 sons, a shepherd boy, who would become the first king of Israel to rule over all 12 tribes. He was a man after God's own heart, and responded to an unexpected challenge with trust in God's might and providence. While approaching the army of Israel, facing the prospect of a coming battle with their foe, the Philistines, David encounters Goliath, who not only possesses what seems to be an insurmountable obstacle to victory, but also an intentional mocking of God's people and his army. In this moment, David replies to this worldly boast with a holy boldness. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, in any case, that he should insult the armies of the living God? With the Spirit of God upon him, David courageously approaches King Saul with a request to be a warrior for Israel and an instrument to silence God's worldly foe. Upon Saul's initial reservation, David replies, "The Lord who delivered me from the claws of a lion and the bear will also keep me safe from the clutches of this Philistine." With the king's blessing and staff in hand, David selected 5 smooth stones, placed them into his shepherd bag, and approached a giant in his life with faith and unending trust in God's justice. When mocked by the apparent mismatch he posed to his opponent, David replies, "You come against me with a sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of armies of Israel, and you have insulted them. Today the Lord will deliver you into my hands. All the multitudes shall learn that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he alone shall deliver you into our hands." Putting his hand into his bag and taking a stone, David hurled it with his sling, and it struck the giant in the forehead, where Goliath fell prostrate on the ground. David then stood over God's defeated foe, and using his enemy's sword, severed his head, claiming a victory for Israel, but more importantly for God himself. We all have giants to face in our life, and many times they come at the most unexpected or inconvenient times possible. When facing the fear of the unknown, as well as the reality of other individuals whose futures are totally dependent on how we respond to that situation, we can choose to trust in God the way David did, or lose hope the way the armies of Israel had done before God intervened through a chosen human instrument. We are all anointed in our baptism to die with Christ and to rise with him to new life. And St. Paul speaks of this in his letter to the Romans. Are you unaware that we who are baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? We were indeed buried with him through baptism into death, so that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, we too might live in the newness of life. Soon afterward, we are once again anointed in the sacrament of confirmation and receive the 7-fold gifts of the Holy Spirit, especially fortitude, to persevere despite fear, and the gift of knowledge that allows us to see God's work actively unfolding in the battles we face in our lives, carrying our cross the way Christ chose to carry his own. According to the National Breast Cancer Foundation, 1 in 8 women will develop this condition in their lifetime. It is the most common cancer diagnosis among women, and on average, every 2 minutes a woman is diagnosed with breast cancer in the United States. An encouraging fact is that there are over 3.5 million breast cancer survivors in the United States. When a woman meets the age of necessity for an annual mammogram and are married, a parent of younger children with an assumed future, and in what they perceive to be very good health, there is no hesitation in approaching this prudent and precautionary medical exam. What would one of them do if upon receiving that exam, they received the crushing diagnosis that wasn't expected? How would their husband react as a man who prides himself on fixing obstacles in his path, but finding himself in a situation where fixing the situation is out of his hands? How would their children react to continue to thrive in the crucible of the treatment and the unknowns that lie ahead for their mom? When Goliath enters our lives, do we put on the armor of truth, the shield of faith, and rely on God's providence like David? Or do we despair in the face of an insurmountable odd before us, like the armies of Israel? Today I'm here with a courageous couple, an old fraternity brother from college, an incredible woman of quiet submission, acceptance, and faith in the face of a giant in her life that they chose to face together with God. Like David in his battle with Goliath, they're able to put their trust in God's providence, persevere, and overcome a paralyzing diagnosis in battle against breast cancer, learning a level of submission and sacrifice unparalleled in their life before they freely chose to unite their sufferings to Christ on the cross. Like St. Paul, their experience echoed his words to the Romans in the battle that they endured and are going to share with you today. If only we suffer with Christ, so that we may also be glorified with him. I consider that the current sufferings of this present time are nothing compared with the glory to be revealed for us. Collin and Nicole Wynne have been married for 20 years and have been blessed with 4 beautiful children. Since 2007, Collin has been and continues to work in technology at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette and has participated in several Acts retreats in a parish within the Diocese of Lafayette, using his gifts and talents as a musician. Nicole, his beloved bride, is a Yale graduate and is in pharmaceutical sales. They are the classic all-American Catholic family who fought the good fight in the daily trials of life before being presented with a battle they least expected. And their story shows that cancer has a way of showing up and creating havoc, regardless of all the normal responsibilities you might be enduring in life. For a time, it did consume their whole world, but their walk also provides hope that there's light at the end of a very, very dark tunnel. Collin and Nicole, welcome to the program, and I really can't thank you guys enough for being here today and being willing to lay out this story with the audience. Thanks for being here.
Oh, happy to be here. Thanks, Chad.
No problem. Nicole?
Great. Love sharing our story.
No, I know this is something kind of fresh on your toes because it's not that long ago that you were able to overcome this and I guess return some type of normalcy in your life for you and your family and your kids. But Nicole, I didn't even realize it, but Collin and I were friends in college. You were in a sorority, we were in a fraternity, and then our life kind of went in different directions. And last year or so, I was going to daily prayer in the Adoration Chapel at St. Pius after dropping my kids off at school there. And I didn't really know why, but I saw you there a lot, and I was curious about what was going on. And somewhere along the line, I got word that you guys were battling cancer, and I had no idea. But maybe each of you could kind of take a moment. I know, maybe give the audience a little background on how you guys met in college, when you got married, at what point this happened in the marriage, and then, what was that like for you, Nicole, as a mom? And then Collin, what was that like for you as a dad? And what was it like as a wife and as a husband?
Well, we met in the traditional sense of at a bar, and just, living the college life of studying and drinking, responsibly, of course. And just, fell in love and got married, and we traveled a little bit for my education. We went on to the East Coast and, graduated from Yale and came back home because we're Southern people, and started having babies and lots of babies. And just, we're living life like kind of everybody else.
Just the day-to-day raising kids, figuring out what they want, their needs, their desires, the kind of things that we all know we have to deal with as parents.
I know that I'm sure when you went to get that mammogram, you weren't expecting the diagnosis that came. So maybe talk about what happened, how that was discovered, and then maybe what happened in both of your hearts and with your kids. Yeah. Well,
I can tell you this, ironically, I actually kept asking her before she went. This was the only mammogram she's ever had. She's actually never successfully passed one, ironically. So since it's only been one, but it was the first one that she did. And I was wanting to go with her, and she's like, it's no big deal. Don't worry about it. It's not a big, but she convinced me it wasn't a big deal. She had a mammogram, and then she tells me the next day, hey, they want me to come back to check a couple more things, but I just talked to everybody. It's routine. I'm like, I'm coming. She's like, no, don't worry about it. And of course, the mammogram went longer and longer and went longer and longer. And I'm at work looking at my watch. Like, I'm wondering why it's been so long. And then I finally give her a call and she gives me the news. And now I'm in the car jetting over to the breast center.
It was definitely a shock. I mean, it was my first mammogram, so I didn't know what was normal and what wasn't. And it was just so unexpected because it doesn't run in my family. When I look at the risk factors for breast cancer, I don't check any of the boxes. You know, I'm not overweight. I breastfed my kids. I don't have any underlying medical conditions.
She eats better than all of us. She's always been she's a dietitian.
My background is nutrition.
Yeah.
So it was just a check in the box. You know, it was just one of those things that I was having some breast pain, but a lot of the doctors that I'm close with said it could be hormones. You know, I'm 41, maybe some fibroids. No one, you know, really, definitely Collin and I never expected this or saw it coming. It was a gift that I, you know, did the mammogram, but it was a shock to find out that it was stage 3, very aggressive cancer.
Right. The timing could not have been, if we would have waited longer, it would have been bad.
Kind of divine intervention that you found it exactly when you found it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
Well, Collin, I know you know, when I had that crushing diagnosis with my son in the ultrasound room, it was kind of that same feeling. It's completely unexpected. You know, Ashley had been through her first pregnancy, no issues. And I know it's crippling to get that diagnosis as a man and not be able to like really, you have to surrender control. It's so hard to do that. Maybe, yes. You know, I know for whatever reason, sometimes for ladies, it seems on the surface easier for them than for a guy because we're kind of programmed in our design and our DNA to want to make things that are wrong right. And I like for men that happen to tune into this podcast to like hear what was that like for you as a man to have to surrender that?
Well, first thing, if it would have been a lot easier if I was the one with the cancer. That would have been so much better for me to handle than this. You know, at the end of the day, fear sets in the minute you find out. Your brain goes in a tailspin. You start wondering how you're going to do this, how you do that, because you don't have any information. Most people don't know a lot about cancer except for a story they've heard from a friend or family member, unless they've really been, you know, that they really dealt with it. And so you really kind of get into this mode of protection. And then you're like, then you start to realize that there's not much you can do. Then the next question is what am I going to do if she's gone? How do I raise the rest of these kids in a manner that she would have wanted? You know, that was really, really difficult part for me. And, I struggled a lot with, that constant, those questions going back and forth in my head and whatnot. And what do I do? How do I fix this? What is she going to go through? What am I facing? I mean, the questions go on and on and on, and there are no answers.
No, unfortunately, when you're in the situation facing the unknown, there rarely is. Nicole, I'd see you in the chapel, obviously in prayer. For me, that was a centering place for me. And I remember having a few conversations with Collin along the journey when he and I got a chance to visit on UL campus and got to go to lunch and mass together one day. What was it like for you? What was going on inside of you this whole time when you found out about the diagnosis?
I mean, shock is definitely the first emotion that, you know, you work through. And I think questioning, you normally, at least for me, I don't know what's normal, but why is this happening? What did I do to initiate cancer in my body? You know, I thought I honored it, you know, as I should. So going to chapel, you know, and getting quiet and just letting it all out, it was hard for me to show my vulnerability and my sadness with Collin because he was so distraught with it. I didn't want to add another layer of, you know, him seeing me kind of fall apart. Which we've learned through this journey that he actually needed to see me fall apart in order to give him, I guess, more purpose in holding me up instead of me trying to deal with that on my own. But going to chapel, I felt like I could just really let it all out emotionally and then kind of get quiet and then have that conversation with with Jesus of, why is this happening? What am I supposed to do with this? Am I going to die? Like, I mean, I really just definitely had, when they say come to Jesus meetings, it was a come to Jesus with, him and I going, all right, you got to talk to me and you got to lead me through this, because I was, again, you're just so taken off guard. You're not prepared for this. I mean, I could have come up with 5 other different disease states I would have predicted I would have had, and this was never on the list of, expecting that maybe one day I might, watch out for breast cancer. So just really, it gave me strength. It gave me a release. It gave me wisdom. It gave me strength. I mean, I really just, kind of, you go to the cross, and I don't know, it was a comfort. And for anybody going through anything really tough, Matthew Kelly always says, God is in the silence of the classroom, and adoration is just that quiet, beautiful, sacred space that you can be in. And that's where I found my strength and kind of my therapy with Jesus.
No, it's beautiful. And just a follow up to that, I would see you in prayer. And some days I would, from like the chapel's very tiny, and you'd be, a kneeler, a row in front of me, and I'd be behind you. And once I had become aware of what was going on, I'd been making an effort to pray for you guys daily when I would go in there. And I would see you some days, and some days you'd be on cloud 9. You're really happy, upbeat. And I was like, this is amazing. Somebody's battling cancer. But if you don't know, you just look, the joy was still radiating out of you. Does that make sense when we had those conversations? Yeah. And then other days I could see the weight I could see the weight of the situation on your shoulders in front of the Eucharist. But I could see the comfort that you were getting from being there, and how it kind of like helped you compose yourself to go. And we'd had a couple conversations in the parking lot to go and do the rest of your day. And it was really awesome to be able to reconnect with both of you this way and in this manner, even though it was an unfortunate situation, in order to be able to do it. I have been dealing with an ongoing situation where there's other people. And of course, in these situations, when you have kids and you have family, you have to rely on family for lots of things. I mean, for you guys, I'm sure it was taking her to a treatment, leaving the kids here. And people around you want to help. But my daddy used to say something to me all the time, and I never forgot it. And he said, you never know somebody's life till you walk a mile in their shoes. And, one time I was speaking with somebody who worked with the special ed kids for like 30 or 40 years, right? And of course, I have a special needs child. And they insinuated, unintentionally, I've been doing this for 30 years. Here's somebody with kids like that every day for 30 years of their life. And I said, look, let me just, give you some friendly advice here. Would you walk up to obviously this is going to hit home. Would you walk up to a cancer patient and tell a cancer patient, you know what it's like to go through chemotherapy for 30 years just because you're administering it to them? No, not at all. Yeah. Because dude, you're just out. No. So guess what? That the same analogy applies. Until you've taken that child home every day and you're caring for them, and that's your flesh and blood, and it's no, and they actually thanked me. They were, I really, and I didn't do it in a rude way. I did it in a very loving, compassionate way, but I was like, I would never say that, to somebody. I always want to know, like, my thing is, let me get into their head. Let me get into where they're coming from, and let me understand their perspective. Because right now, I'm just the guy on the outside looking in. I don't have no idea what it's like to be on the inside looking out. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to maybe kind of share what was that like with family members and friends who maybe unintentionally, and this might help people in the long run, that other people are dealing with things. There's a line you don't cross, right? In those situations, even if you do it unintentionally. And how do you handle that with Christian charity and love and make it a teaching moment instead of an argument?
Well, I guess I'll go. At this point, it's an interesting perspective because, that thing about fear that I keep bringing up. Sure. One thing I learned in one of my Acts retreats is fear is a liar. That was our theme. And I wish I had that kind of roll around in my head when this happened, because everybody falls into that fear mode. And I'm talking everybody. We're talking aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, all these different people all now are in fear. And then the way they process their fear is what you receive. So regardless of whatever they know about cancer or not, or what's ever going on with their lives, they project that on you. Now they do it in a way that they think is helpful, and that they're trying to be loving. So they're all being loving. So the first thing you get is a lot of prayers, which is absolutely, a great thing. But a lot of times when you get home from the diagnosis and the word gets out, then you get bombarded. And they're just trying to help you all at once at the same time. So each person that's, hey, we love you, we feel for you, while the phone's ringing, while that's happening, and then another phone, then it's over and over and over again. So I kind of almost got into this mode of protectivism. This is something I can do, Chad. I can protect her from being bombarded, even though at the end of the day, it may or may not have been the right thing to do. I don't know, because I'm hopefully not going to have to go through this again. To decide if it was. And at the end of the day, she just, she got an outpouring of love, which is great. In some cases, people offered to do certain things that we didn't need. A lot of times what we just need was quiet, normalcy. We want to talk to our kids. Like we're going to take a day off today. We're not going to talk about cancer today. We're going to sit at home, and then all of a sudden we'll get phone calls saying, well, yeah, but we want to talk about this. We think that you need to grieve more. You need to do this. You don't seem like you're that worried about it, because what they don't know is that she's been going to chapel every day, and that's where that's coming from. And that strength, some people are going, why aren't you crying? And it was a fascinating thing to be part of. I guarantee I could have handled it better. I no doubt in my mind I could have handled it better, and I'm sure that people looked at me as guarding Nicole from them and all that kind of stuff, and that in some ways I did do that, and I don't know if it was the right thing to do. It was just I needed to do something,
So for me, everyone would ask, what can we do? Because their hearts are all in the right place. And prayer was the best gift that anyone could give us.
Yes.
And I know it seems in some people's mind not enough. But it was the best gift that they could give us. And I don't think they really realize, and I hope the people that are listening to this that were part of our journey can hear our gratitude, because I've prayed for other people when they've asked, or when I know that they're going through a tough time, and I hope it helps, but you never really kind of know, did they feel God's grace? Was my prayer heard? Was it answered? Did it help? And that's the part of prayer sometimes that is the disconnect, if you will. But I am here to say I felt people's prayers, and it was the most beautiful living experience I've ever had in my whole entire life. You kind of glide through it a little easier. It's still very difficult. There's ups and downs, but I just felt this lightness on a daily basis. I felt safe. I felt kind of free from from the heaviness of the diagnosis. And I know it was just from so many people praying for us. And I can never say thank you enough, because it definitely gave me the energy that I needed to fight, this big, medical thing. But as well as continue to live, with my children and with my husband and with my work, because all those things filled me up. I couldn't just live in Cancerville day in, day out, because that's just a very dark rabbit hole that I wasn't willing to go into.
I mean, I can affirm for both of you, Collin, I don't think anybody, knows what they would do in that situation. I don't know if there's a right or wrong way to go about doing it. You just kind of do what's laid on your heart. And I think the idea of a man to be a guardian and a protector just kicked in. And, there's nothing to be ashamed of in that. There's tons of things in my life over the last 10 years in a difficult situation based on, you're trying to measure your emotions with reason, but sometimes in those difficult situations, our fallen nature gets the best of us and we react to it. And, I've done things that I wish I could take back, but, when I met with you, we had a chance to visit. I think you were dealing with it like anybody normally would in your situation. I mean, I don't know what I would do in that situation. I've already been through something really extreme and difficult, but it was my child. It wasn't my spouse. And, like your covenant partner is really, really important. and you just see your family as a unit, and it's with you as the husband and your wife as the wife. And absent of that could be like really, really difficult to deal with. And Nicole, I just want to also affirm that, like I said, when I could see the prayer carrying you when you came out of the chapel, and it was a blessing for me. I was dealing with a couple of minor health issues at the time that I just discovered, and I was, having anxiety, and I mean, it was just I love people that put things in perspective, and situations often put things in perspective, and God does a really awesome way of doing that for you through your friends and through the people that cross your daily path. And I want you guys to know that I did offer up any difficulty I had at that time for you. And I hope, and it was an affirmation for me to hear you say that it carried you. So like you said, anybody that thinks that prayer doesn't carry people, they're crazy. Speaking of carrying things, Christ fell 3 times, right, on the way to Calvary, carrying his own cross, right? And of course, we know the story, the Passion narrative, where Simon of Cyrene comes along and helps him. He's God, and he still needs help carrying his cross all the way to the top of Calvary. So I'm sure each of you had a Simon of Cyrene that was somebody you could, or some group of people you could rely on during this. So why don't each of you take a second and kind of talk about who was that person or group of people for each of you in this journey?
Well, you know how Nicole just talked about adoration and whatnot. My faith is renewed through community. That's what works for me the best. And I know that we all have to find the way there in our own way, right? And so I was very prevalent in these ACT retreats. I was actually going through one at the time of this diagnosis. And anybody who's teamed an ACT retreat, there's 14 weeks of meetings that lead up to it. And so we were just about on the cusp of going to actually have the retreat before we found out. And at the very last minute, right before the retreat, I couldn't go because we had to go to MD Anderson. That's when MD Anderson said to go. That's when you're going. So we went, and it was a long week for me and Nicole because we kept getting worse diagnosis as we did more tests, and the result of what she actually had got worse as we went. And we had moved to stage 3 at this point, and we were checking for stage 4. I was waiting in the waiting area. She's getting a bone scan, and then I get this text message from the whole ACTS group wishing us well, saying they were praying for us. They took a huge group photo. It's on my desk right now, right above my head. It could not have come at a better time, because the minute I got that, she walks out, and within an hour we found out that no, it's not stage 4. We can handle this. So it was these are those moments for me that make a huge difference. I know that God puts those out there for us, and that was one of them. And there are several other ones, but that for me, that was a big part of that experience.
So some of the things that I find were definitely divine and miracles in our journey. A dear friend of mine reached out and said, I really think you should get a second opinion. And we were getting all of our, tests done here in Lafayette. And she says, MD Anderson is right, 3 hours away. It's in my heart. I had to call and tell you this, just think about it. And MD Anderson wasn't on our radar at the time. And she just said, look, she said, if the second opinion says the same thing that the Lafayette guys are saying, great, that you're in the right place, you're in the right scope, you're on the right track. And if not, you'll be grateful. So, it's so overwhelming trying to figure out, what you have, where you're going to go, who you're going to use. It's a very exhausting process. And so she planted the seed, and we ended up going to MD Anderson to kind of get that second opinion. And she literally saved my life, because I was, and it's no fault of their own. Things just happen. So I'm not blaming anybody. We were misdiagnosed. They just had different protocols they do here versus there. And we just really would not have had the same path. And we don't know where it would have gone if we wouldn't have had that second opinion. So we were very, very grateful that someone, and when I thanked her later, her name's Molly Beach. She's a wonderful person. We love her. When I thanked her later, she's so humble. She said, it wasn't me, it was just God. But the thing I reminded her was that, yes, God, had the wisdom to tell you that, but you had to still act on it. So there's, God does his part always, but we have to do our part in order to fulfill what he's trying to get us to do. So she was definitely a huge miracle in our story, and we're so grateful.
That's beautiful, man. And you're right. God does intervene, but he always uses secondary causes, and people have free will, and they can choose to either embrace the grace and act on it or not. And thank God she called. And I know after several conversations with Collin how beneficial MD Anderson was to your journey. And I'm sure you'll be eternally indebted to them and their cause for other people who have to deal with something very similar. So
yeah. I want to say one more thing about,
Sure.
Miracles. We had a lot of miracles. We could probably have a whole podcast on miracles.
Yes.
But I have it on my heart, and we prayed before. So I feel like this is the Holy Spirit kind of working on this point. We have a dear friend who would send us, well, I had lots of people who sent cards, and I never appreciated cards. I sent cards before, and, I was like, okay, I sent a card. But when you're in this situation, getting happy mail is such a treat. So I am, maybe in my future life will become a Hallmark rep and really start selling greeting cards, because I have a new appreciation for them, and they're just such a simple way to show that you care. And it really touches everyone's heart. So if you have somebody in your life that's going through something difficult, get their address and start sending them some happy mail. We had this one friend, she was the master at sending cards. I have some of her cards framed. I don't even know where she'd buy her cards, because I've never seen these cards that are so great. Mm-hmm. And she just had this magic touch of putting her heart in the card. She always had a personal note that was so sweet and so thoughtful. And I just think in these times, little things make a big difference. And I think you can really, we always think of these grandiose things that we want to do, especially when that someone's struggling or going through something really big. And honestly, it was the little things that people did for us that made the biggest difference.
Absolutely.
So cards matter. That is my message. The Holy Spirit is telling me cards matter, and send somebody a card today. If you listen to this and someone's on your heart, send them a card.
This is that's awesome. And you're right. It's always the little things, that make the biggest difference in situations like that. No return to sender on those things, right? When you catch them in the mail, but there's always a turning point, and that's a good segue into this. I know now, looking back on it, that you've been through it. I know it was hard, and I'm sure there's still moments where you get gripped in that moment of what it was like to go through it. But obviously, after listening to both of you guys today and knowing you for as long as I have, I can obviously see how, despite the fact this was difficult, it also became a very big blessing in your life as a husband and a wife, and as a mother and a father. And I'm sure there's numerous people that are going to listen to this who can relate to much of what you're saying, whether they're dealing with breast cancer or something else. But at what point did you discover this was a blessing and not a curse, despite of how difficult it is or was?
Whenever and this is actually more recently than a while, because we've been dealing with this since October of last year. But that community I talked about before, I finally, did what I was suggested to do. And now I have a Friday prayer group that I go to at St. Pius. And I hope they listen to this, because I just want to let them know how much of a difference that makes for me, to have that continued meeting just to discuss, the gospel, and to talk to just good men, that's a big deal for me. And that was a major, that has been almost maintenance, to keeping me kind of on the right path. That was a big deal for me.
I think for me, I've always wanted, I like to, Collin makes fun of me because I always have personal growth books that I'm reading. And so he says I've read every single one. I have not, but I'm on my way. I've always inspired to be a saint. I think we're all called to be saints, but that's a very lofty, and sometimes it feels unattainable status, especially when you read about saints. And all of the saints go through really hard stuff. And I would say, in my prayer time, okay, God, teach me, use me, teach me how you want me to be holy and saint-like. And then I would get scared, because when I'd read their stories, I was like, oh my gosh, they went through some really bad stuff, and I don't really want to go through any of that. And I was always had that little bit of fear of, ooh, if I'm called to be a saint, I might go through some really, really hard stuff. And so this was one of them, not by choice, but it definitely, I think it was divine. And thinking it's divine is because he will truly get you through it. Like that grace will carry you through. It's not fun to go through, but he breaks you open to make you better. And we, as a couple, we pray more. We have a different appreciation for our health, for sure. And a different appreciation for life, a different appreciation for little things, sending people cards, like it's just, you do change, but he has to put you through the fire in order to purify you.
Well, this is what God said to me. So I was going through a lot of anxiety and issues, things before. That's something that I haven't really told anybody that I've been dealing with. And then God said, oh yeah, I bet you can deal with a lot more than you think. And basically that was the message, right? And so, and we have.
Yeah. I think, one of my things right now is, when I'm in doubt mode or whatever, we all have down days and up days, is that you can do hard things. They're not fun, but you can do them. You're stronger than you think you are. And you don't ever find that strength by being forced through something very difficult. And so there's beauty in everything, but, I would never wish cancer on anybody because it is terrible and the treatment is still barbaric.
Yeah.
But like you said, how did you find God in this? And he's there the whole time, but he has to break you open for you to really feel him.
I'm listening to both of you and have two glaring thoughts like pounding on my brain. The first one is that if anybody really takes the time, and you said you're doing a Bible study, Collin, I think that's awesome. It's fruitful, especially since you need community for you to have that community of men. Psalm 27:17 says, iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another. But you gotta have strong men in your life walking with you and holding you accountable. And I think you found that. And yet, God tells us in the Gospels, hey, I'm not going to take all your pain away from you, because he invites us to carry our cross. But he does promise us he'd be with us every step of the way through it. And your testimony is showing that. And then the idea about being a saint, like one time after I had Eli, and God's taken me to another level. And it's a place I never thought I would be. But I honestly prayed that prayer. I was like, make me a saint. And I was getting frustrated one day after I prayed that prayer, and some difficult things started happening in my life, again. And I said, I went into confession, and I could confess. I said, Father, I'm aggravated. I prayed to be a saint, but and he said, well, that's a beautiful prayer. He said, you just don't get to determine how that happens. God does. And as you're speaking to me, that's the life of the saints. But the beautiful thing is that they were human like you and me. They were fallen like us. They just cooperated with God's grace, and they were able to do extraordinary things because he empowered them to do it. And I'm seeing that in you guys as friends and as people that I've known and love very dearly. The last thing I'd say is, for me, one of the things that really transformed my life was the way I learned how to love. The cross transforms your love from a mere human love into a divine love, where you are willing to constantly will the good of the other as the other over yourself. And this becomes so remotely necessary that regardless of how you feel about it in the moment, the cross brings you to a point where if you love till it hurts, you will choose that. So maybe each of you could talk about, in your own way, maybe not just as husband and wife, but maybe as mom and dad. How was your love transformed for one another, and how was your love transformed for your children through the cross?
Well, with this whole thing, as a husband, I was watching her once they started the chemo, and I was watching all these different things start to happen. Like those things that you can't control, right? That you can ask about, and the doctor will be like, well, this may happen, that may happen. And they pretty much all did. And hair falling out, skin, the way she feels, not being able to get off the couch, all these kind of different things they just tear at you. And then I became this parent who started parenting all the way across the board. Sometimes as fathers, we tend to kind of like, well, that's what she does, and this is what I do, and that's what, that's how we do this. And no, I don't like to do the baths. She does baths. Well, I do the baths now. I did them all. I did everything. I cooked, cleaned, brought kids where they had to go, picked them up, everything they needed. At the end of the day, used to frustrate me sometimes, and it just doesn't anymore. It's just not a thing that is a problem for me. And that's, in the day, I actually spend more time with them than I did before.
Beautiful, man.
So cancer is brutal, and it takes away I don't consider myself a vain person. Well, I apparently am more vain than I thought I was, because everyone said I look cute bald, but look, let me just tell you, being bald as a woman, it ain't fun. Like, you have to go put a hat on just to go to your mailbox because your scalp burns. So it like strips you of everything. And Collin showed me the most beautiful love, because I could tell sometimes in his eyes I was looking a little rough. But he never like looked at me in disgust or like, that I wasn't, he's like, I guess I feel like he saw my soul and not my exterior that was looking, like I said, pretty rough. And so like he definitely demonstrated and lived out the ultimate love as a husband. The one thing that's so funny that you asked this question is, and maybe it's not funny because it's divine, but, we have signs of love. That is like my one word. People, in some of these podcasts, if you had one word to describe yourself, or one word that you want to live by, or what do you want on your tombstone? First of all, I want a good joke on my tombstone, because I think if you go and read those tombstones, they're quite boring and they need to jazz it up, when you're walking the cemetery. Number two is that love, and love is a choice. And it's not always easy, but, I think sometimes when we're in disagreement, also known as an argument, I have to remind myself to choose love. And what would love be in this situation that I'm not really in that state? And so I think life and trials will test you, and you can become bitter, or you can become more patient, more loving, more appreciative, and be grateful that you went through it. And in the beginning, I would hear some of these podcasts of, cancer's a gift. And I wanted to really, really call them up and go say some curse words to them and say, no, it is not. But when you learn of the gifts that it does have hidden in it, you are more appreciative of it. And not to say that you ever want to go through it again, but love is beautiful, and it's the way we are called to live, and it is not easy, but you should surround yourself with it through people. And if you're like me that needs Post-it notes everywhere, you write it down in your car, and Chad has seen my dash, and it's got Post-it notes everywhere, as well as in your home, because we all need to remind to choose love.
We work together, which is what we always done it as a couple, but you really start to work together at this point, right? We've researched everything about cancer. We know almost everything there is to know, and you still don't know, which is ironic. But at the end of the day, we've changed our diets. We've looked at the future. We've made serious changes in our lives. We're healthier than we've ever been. These are all things that would not have happened if this didn't happen. We don't even, I've learned to cook vegan, and we eat vegan all the time now. I even have a little website and everything where we'll put my dishes that I made up, some good, some work in progress. And,
well, I have that. Nice. I have that website, and I will. I will definitely share it with you. And I was going to ask you about the food thing, because I remember you guys mentioned it when we kind of did a little prep work for the show, and the vegan thing was kind of cool. I was kind of intrigued by that when we got to talk. So maybe you said that's one of the blessings. Can maybe elaborate just a little bit on that?
Sure. Well, one thing, it's through a lot of research and a lot of reading and just learning about cancer and how it works, especially in breast cancer. The vegan diet is it's the way to go. It is preventative. We have to, once you're done going through all this treatment, you have to continue to fight by taking certain medications for years. 5 years, I think, is the time frame. And so that diet can actually do what those medications can do without the side effects. And that's based on a lot of research. And I know that doctors don't tend to say that because they don't really, they can't prove it. They can't sit there and be like, oh, okay, well, you could take this pill that I prescribed, or you could go and eat more cruciferous vegetables. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so they have a lot of trouble with that kind of way of thinking. And we've learned a lot from that, and we have grown exponentially when it comes to just researching. And then we like it. I mean, it's a good diet.
One documentary I'd recommend if anyone's interested in this, if you have a high risk for cancer or you just want to become healthier, the documentary Forks Over Knives is done by two excellent doctors, and it's very interesting. And that really helped open our eyes up. And it's an easy resource for people to watch and get kind of plugged in to what the science is behind eating and why, you choose a fruits and vegetable and plant-based diet.
You can even delve down to the actual reasons that the vegetables and whatnot can actually prevent cancerous cells from binding in certain areas, and it's fascinating.
That does sound fascinating, and I think that's some good advice for people who just want to get healthy in general down here. The food's so great down here because of our culture. It can be very dangerous if you don't temper yourself with a good amount of mastering your appetite and your passion for food, because that's something definitely people have down here. But I'm thinking about 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind. It's not rude, it's not pompous, it's not jealous, it's not self-seeking. It doesn't brood over injury or rejoice in wrongdoing, but it rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and it endures all things. That love didn't fail on Calvary. It didn't fail in an ultrasound room with me, and it certainly did not fail the two of you on this journey. Cling to Christ, and let the world fall as it may, and be that witness in the world. Before I close this up, is there anything else you guys want to share? I mean, it's just an incredible journey, or something that maybe you want to talk about that I didn't ask you about. I
think we would like to, I think we both agree we'd like to thank Father Manny. We got to have dinner with him and a doctor friend of his, and he gave us a blessing that evening, which I think is also one of those turning points in the journey. It was so much fun to listen to him just cut up at the table, and he's a hilarious guy, but he is amazing, and he whispered stuff to us, and what he told me is that I will find peace. And that was the first time in the journey that I actually started to head in that direction. And then that was him doing that. And Nicole has her own experience with him.
I mean, I would just say, as I guess in closing with our journey, doctors have all good intentions when they're treating patients, no matter what your medical crisis or situation is. But getting a second opinion, and if your physician doesn't support you getting a second opinion, just know that that's a red flag, and go get a second opinion. Like, I know you hear that. I know, when you're in that, sometimes it's really exhausting to make that extra effort. But when it's something like cancer or anything major, it's really important. And your physician that you're going to work with should support you getting more information and not making you feel bad for, wanting to do that. So I would just, in a general, I guess, medical experience opinion of somebody whose second opinion saved my life, I would just like to kind of add that in for the viewers that may need to hear that.
No, that's beautiful. And, I had an experience with Father Manny myself with Eli, and I can definitively say the same thing happened with me, Collin. After I had this experience with him, it's a little different than the one you had. But moving forward in that journey after that moment, he certainly has the gift of healing, be it physically, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. All those things have happened through his intercession. He's a special priest, and we're lucky to have him in the diocese. And I think it's just prudent. Anybody gets a diagnosis to get a second opinion. And like you said, it obviously had huge implications for you on your journey. Collin and Nicole, look, it's been great having you guys on the show today. And I want to thank you for your humility and your vulnerability and sharing your suffering and how you have allowed Christ to work in it, obviously for your own benefit, but more importantly, for the benefit of others. Please share this podcast, give it a rating, leave a comment if you would like to invite me to speak at an event or pick up a copy of my books. Shoot me an email on social media or go to my website at chadjadis.com. All proceeds that I gain from my writing and speaking go to fund Eli's lifelong medical expenses. Remember, we must boast most gladly in our weaknesses, so that the strength of Christ might be with us. For when we're weak, that's when we're strong. And it takes a Good Friday to leave behind who the world says we should be, in order to rise with Jesus Christ on Easter Sunday as the person he created us to be, a saint. Until next time, God love you.
In a world that says give up, I did not yield. I gave my all for your battlefield.